So what does Ohio State do from here? When you lose your defensive coordinator to a place like Ohio State, it's kind of like having to remodel your kitchen in a really nice house. Like, yeah, it kind of sucks, right? Sort of a pain, but it's still a nice house, still in a nice neighborhood. You still have a massive budget to get it done. So is it uncomfortable? Do you wish you didn't have to do it? Sure. It's not a small thing, but also, like, it's still Ohio State. It's still Tim Walton running the secondary, still James Laurinaitis on that staff, still Larry Johnson running the defensive line. Like, yeah, not fun, but Ohio State still has every reason for optimism here going forward, even with losing their DC from a national title team. So there's a couple of names that I like when you talk about who could be the next guy in Columbus to call the defense. There's a full hot board at on3.com from Pete Nakos. Go check that out. But Bryant Haynes is a name we've discussed before on this show, DC at Indiana, Broyles Award finalist. I like the idea of kind of the rising star mold, if you will. Had one of the best run defenses in America last year. I think that's a phenomenal candidate. Phil Parker from Iowa, a guy who's coached at Iowa for a long time, one of the longest tenured DCs, but you know what you're getting in him. Like, he's had a top 20 scoring defense since 2015. Also, I said he's from Iowa as a coach, but dude's from Ohio. We know Ohio State fans. There's one box they would appreciate having checked when it comes to their staff, one of their own, someone who gets it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, if it's me, I really like the idea of promoting safeties coach Matt Guerrieri to be the DC. Kind of keeps that formula the same. From a schematic perspective, sure, coached around Jim Knowles for a long time, so that side of it could kind of stay the same. But I just appreciate the idea of having someone running your defense who knows what it looks like, knows what a national title defense is supposed to be, knows the silver bullet standard, if you will. And also, it doesn't hurt that this is happening now towards the end of January. Like, who else are you really going to go grab? Remains to be seen. We'll talk about it if that happens. But the task for Ohio State, it's not even about talent, which sounds bizarre, but you look at Ohio State, cool, you got Sonny Styles coming back, Davison Igbinosun coming back. You got Caleb Downs, the best defensive player in college football, coming back. It's not about talent. Now you got to replace production and experience. What you have to replace is leadership and culture. Like Ohio State last year, everyone was talking about this when they won the national title and during their playoff run. Why were they so successful? Because they were running hot. Because they were an angry, hungry dog devouring and spitting out and chewing everything in their way, especially on defense. Who was responsible for that? Yeah, Jim Knowles, of course, played a part as the DC. To me, it was Jack Sawyer who was the temp setter for that operation. Why? Because it meant something to him. Him and the rest of that defense, and what I could gather, again, going back to Jack Sawyer being a temp setter, he was the one that sort of led the charge, sounded the alarm, all those things. And so if it's not about talent, it's about temperature. I love the idea of someone who's been around that temperature, who's been on that staff when that temperature was set at the right spot, being the guy to call the shots for that defense. Okay? Now, you're going to have some new faces, like I mentioned. A lot of starters are gone. Having someone who has the temperature set at the right spot competitively and culturally to bring those guys into that fold, of course, they have to be player-led, but to have the coaches feed that culture and have someone, again, a Matt Guerrieri who would be able to feed that culture, that gets me really excited. And everyone's going to talk about scheme during this coordinator process, and that's fine. I'm here for that. I think scheme is important. But at a place like Ohio State, scheme it should be secondary to everything else you're getting in a DC. Like, the comp for me is like scheme when hiring a coordinator is like looks when you're getting married. It should matter. It should matter at first. It should be a prerequisite, but really I'm more concerned about like who am I getting married to? Who's the person that's going to be my DC, if you will? Like, what are they bringing out of you? Who are they going to be when times get tough? When you get that bad news? When you have some unfortunate circumstances? Who's going to be the one to set the temperature? Who's going to be the one to bring the best out of you? Again, it's a weird comp, but I'm just telling you, looks are a big talking point on the front end. Everyone wants to know what scheme you run, how much they blitz. It's important. It should be a discussion, but it very quickly becomes less important when you're down 17-7 on the road and you got to find a way to get your players in line and have a way to have them play above their level of where they're playing at that point in time. So, again, I like Matt Guerrieri for a lot of those reasons. But in 2025, it might be, I hesitate to say this because we don't know what the offense will look like, but I guess that's why I say it. You might need that defense to be ahead of the offense. And that sounds sort of weird because Jeremiah Smith still exists. But with who you have returning, and if you do go internal with this hire, you open with Texas. So now they'll have their own starting quarterback that they're rolling out there too for the first time in Arch Manning. But it's a lot to ask a Julian Sayin or a Lincoln Kienholz to be able to hit the ground running and, hey, let's go score 30 or let's go score in the 40s to go beat Texas. I don't think that's really the most realistic, regardless of who's calling the plays for Ohio State on offense. So it might be a thing where you need that defense to kind of evolve first and draw first blood in terms of finding their identity. But this is where Ryan Day and winning the national title again becomes invaluable. We've said this now probably 3 or 4 times throughout this show, so I apologize if it becomes a little bit stale. This is just how I feel. Knowing what a national title team, a national title defense looks like, operates like, smells like, walks like, all those things, that matters when you hire your next guy. And that should be the approach when it comes to setting your temperature next year. So you know what it looks like now. You do what all the great coaches do and adapt. That's the question for Ryan Day. That's the question for Ohio State. And that's the question they're going to have to answer with whoever's calling the defense next year in place of Jim Knowles. But again, looks are great. Scheme's great. Who are you, though, when times get tough? That's the important part of this whole thing.